Welcome to the Garden Talk podcast, where we interview growers from all over the world, both beginners and experts, seeking to learn more about what they know about gardening and how they do things in their garden. What's up, everybody? For those of you that don't know me, my name is Chris, aka Mr. Grow It, and you're tuned into the Garden Talk podcast. This is episode number 153. In this episode, I interview Alexandria, aka Queen of the Sun-Grown. She has been on the podcast twice before, episodes number 30 and 82, and she's back again this time to talk about closed-loop gardening. She talks about things such as composting, ecological gardening, utilizing animals, IPM, and many other things that relate to creating and working in a closed-loop system. If you want to see short clips of these podcast episodes, search Garden Talk Clips on YouTube. I also have a gardening channel where I show the plants that I grow. Both of those channels will be linked down in the YouTube description section below. One of my goals for this podcast is to bring free information about gardening to the general public. That being said, I'd like to thank the sponsors of today's episode who helped make that goal possible. Thanks to AC Infinity for sponsoring this episode. Check out their humidifiers, which can help increase the humidity in your grow space. Their humidifiers have 10 different levels and smart control features such as VPD and humidity programming, so you can get precise humidity control. Click the link in the description section below so you can learn more about their humidifiers, and the discount code MrGrowIt15 works on both Amazon and their website, acinfinity.com. Stash Blend. Stash Blend consists of several ingredients in one, so you no longer have to buy individual bottles. It includes corn steep liquor, seaweed extract, humic acid, beneficial bacteria, silica, and mycorrhizal fungi. It can be used in addition to your synthetic base nutrients or be used in living soil systems. Simply mix it into water and water your plants with it. You can get it at stashblend.com, link in the description section below, and use the discount code THESTASH. And we are back, and I'm joined with Alexandria, also known as Queen of the Sun-Grown. How you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thank you for having me. Third time's a charm.
Yeah, I was going to say, you are back for the third time. So you had 2 other episodes. I love to look up the previous episodes and kind of just announce like what it got for views and stuff. So the first episode we did together was episode 30, September 5th, 2021. Time flies. 36,000 views on that one. Then we went, second meeting was episode 82, September 10th, 2022. So a year later, 167,000 views on that one. And
nice.
Here we go. Let's see if we can double this one up. Let's see if we can get 300,000 views on this one. That would be incredible. We have a great talk today. You're so much into permaculture, regenerative gardening, just organic, all natural. This time around, we're going to talk about closed loop farming, closed loop gardening, closed loop operations, whatever you want to call it, but closed loop system. This is something that really interests me. I think it interests a lot of people because it saves people money. And we're going to get into the nitty-gritty details on it. But first, could you do an introduction for those folks that didn't catch the first couple episodes we did together?
Yeah, definitely. So my name is Alexandria Irons, and my business is Queen of the Sun-Grown. You can find me on all of the platforms under that handle. I am first and foremost a mother, wife, gardener, homesteader, and educator. I have a background in commercial medical plant cultivation, and I have since kind of grown with that career, but really focused more recently on just like educating home growers. I love teaching, so I have online classes and I do podcasting, and I write for Seedsman and the Humble Seed Company, and I write for my Patreons. I love writing. That's probably my favorite form of education. It's just reading, writing. And of course, being out in the garden and actually, just doing it, getting your hands dirty, being in the sun. So I have learned so much since we last spoke. So I'm really excited to talk again because every opportunity, every garden, every day is a chance to learn more. And I feel like my life is just one long quest to learn as much as I possibly can about, honestly, everything. I question everything. So I can't wait to, share some more with your guests and you.
Awesome. Well, like I mentioned earlier, it's been 2 years since we last talked. And I remember those conversations where the knowledge, you just have such deep knowledge on so many different things that are beneficial for gardeners. And you had mentioned you learned so much since then. I just can't wait to dive into this. There are some folks that are listening and that don't know what a closed loop system is or what closed loop farming is. Can you explain that to us?
Yeah, definitely. So if you just break down the word, what it is in itself, right? Closed loop. So you're closing a loop, that's a circle, right? And your farm or your garden or your home, so that you're taking something that would otherwise be a waste and turning it into an input. Instead of having these external sources to create like fertilizers or IPM tools, you're able to create that loop within your garden by utilizing like multiple species, basically, and waste products. So right now, first I have to say, I was raised Mormon, so we were very like self-sufficient, have a year supply of food. And so it was kind of ingrained in my like upbringing to be resilient, that kind of like pioneer mindset. And so I've always been deeply interested in how I can do things for myself, make my own products. But as we see the world coming into this kind of, existential crisis or whatever you want to call it, inflation, we see more people trying to save money, trying to do things healthier because we have no idea what's in these products that we're using, we're feeding ourselves, we're consuming, and we're come to find out a lot of it is really bad for us. So being able to have that power of, hey, I created this for myself, for my plant, I grew it, I consumed it, and it gives you the control. It's definitely more labor intensive than just going and buying something. But for those crazy enough you want to just do it all, it's very rewarding, and it's something that I'm trying to put into place more and more in my garden. So last we spoke, I was in California, completely different farm. And since then I have a 4-year-old son, and we moved back up to northeastern Washington on the Idaho border. My whole family is in Idaho, but Idaho's not so friendly with the kind of plants that we like. So I'm right here on the border, and it's a completely new garden I built in May. And so I have 12 acres. I'm overlooking a little creek that meanders through. There's tons of wildlife, all different types of species. And I'm starting to build this homestead where I can try to create as much of my own inputs for my garden and for my family as possible. So that means closing the loops wherever I can. We're like 30 minutes from going into town. So for instance, a great example, I have chickens, right? So the chickens are helping compost. They're free range. Well, they were free ranging before the puppy started killing them. And you take, all of your waste, your leaves from defoliation, your weeds, from the ground, anything that you're clearing, any biomass, any plant matter, you're composting it, your waste from your kitchen. And the chickens are going through and eating what they like, scratching out, getting the, maggots that are growing in there, worms are crawling through, and it's breaking it down right there in your ecosystem. And then you can turn that compost into, it is compost, but you could do a compost aerated tea or an extract, and you can apply that in your garden. Or for instance, I have cherry trees and pear trees and apple trees. You can make ferments, or you can eat it, but with the excess, so it's just like taking what you have and being able to turn that into something else, not letting it stop. So there you have that full circle, that loop.
Got it. That makes sense. I think kind of taking a step back and trying to think about what would probably be the most difficult thing to manage when it comes to a closed loop system. Me looking in, I'm trying to figure out, okay, how would you feed the plants, right? What are some ways that plants can receive the required nutrition through a closed loop system? And I know you mentioned a couple things already, but maybe kind of dive into details on some of those things.
Yeah, definitely. So I mentioned ferments, which I'm not a huge fermenter. I did a class last year with Chris Trump on KNF stuff, and God bless, the KNFers. That is just not something that's totally an option to go for your closed loop system. That's not me. I am a composter. I love the diversity, the microbial diversity of compost. So when you are making a ferment, you're focusing on a set of microbial life, and it's going to do its thing. But with compost, it's kind of a symphony, an orchestra. You don't know exactly everything that you're going to get, but it's beautiful. You can check it out on the microscope, and you have different molecules of carbon structured. There's like it's like a snowflake, there's no two of the same one. So you're getting just so much diversity, and not only in that microbial life, but in the carbon molecules themselves and what types of nutrients you can provide to your plant. So the more diversity that you put into your compost system, the more nutrient diversity you can provide to your plant. Now, you can do targeted composts if you're interested in that kind of a thing. So with there's databases online, right, where you can look at the NPK ratios of every plant almost. Like you can go look up, for instance, I use a lot of barley in my garden. That is like super high in phosphorus. And so I'm growing barley this next year. I bought like bulk barley from you can get it at your local beer supply store. So I bought the malted barley this year, but next year my plan is to grow it myself, because that's part of the closing that loop and that cycle. So barley is really high in phosphorus. So you can compost that, you can add it directly into your soil. I like to make teas out of it. And so not only does it contain high amounts of phosphorus, but it also contains the enzyme phosphatases. And so phosphatases is, and I think this is important to back up, that enzymes are complex chains of amino acids, and they are responsible for catalyzing chemical reactions, so that the organic nutrients that we are all using in our gardens can actually break down and become available to the plant. And so like bacteria and fungi, they produce enzymes, but enzymes are all over the world. They're in a lot of seeds. And so that's what barley is, right? It's a seed, the barley grain itself. So it's packed full of enzymes that contain the specific direction to break down the phosphorus to become available to the plant. It's like this amazing thing. And that's why you don't have to feed your seedlings right away, right? Like that first week, they don't need nutrition, because that seed is full of all of the enzymes and nutrients that make that available to the plant. So by growing things that obviously this is complex, and you have to have like knowledge about what you're doing to ensure that your plant is getting sufficient amounts of NPK, because if you're just creating a compost with all of your kitchen scraps and then hoping that you put that on your plant and it's going to provide it with everything it needs, you'll probably be sorely disappointed, right? So knowing what you're putting into your compost, or what it contains, is really going to help you ensure that you're feeding your plant the proper nutrition that it requires. You can do this by simple soil testing. I did a podcast episode with the soil doctor, and he has like a tool, Bryant, I think his name is, on his website, soildoctorconsulting.com, and you can enter your soil testing results, and he will give you a customized reads, because, not all of us are agronomists and can read these, the data that's provided, but really having that baseline to make adjustments and create nutrients for your plant is really what's going to help you, because we don't know. I mean, what is everyone eating? We don't know what you're putting into your compost. Is it going to be just like a bunch of nitrogen? Is it going to have everything that's required? So the great thing about compost, though, and I think that this is the beginner introduction for everyone. I think we talked about this in one of our previous episodes, like everyone should compost. And that is the beginning of closing the loop, because all of us create waste. So that should just be like a baseline of something that we are doing that we can provide nutrition for our plant. But that's not going to be enough to provide a well-rounded, like if you were just talking, I'm in the middle of harvesting my Croptober, and I would not get the plants, the beautiful buds that I got, if I just fed them compost, right? And if anyone has composted, they know that a 3 by 3 by 3 foot pile turns into nothing after, a few months of turning it. It degrades and it gets so small. But the amazing thing about compost is that all of the bacteria and the enzymes, the carbohydrates that are in there, you can make, like I said, a tea where you're just bubbling it with air stones, and you can extract some of that microbial life and the nutrition, and you can spray it across a much bigger area than if you just had that compost. So then you're kickstarting the biology in soil that probably is pretty devoid of life, because most people that are listening to this are going to be living in, suburban sprawls where the topsoil has been scraped away, which the top 6 inches of soil is where most of our microbes live. And so we just have that base rock, that base parent material of soil, which isn't quite soil yet. It's the beginning, it's the minerals, but by adding the carbohydrates and the bacteria and the fungi, protozoa, nematodes, all of that microbial life from the compost, and then more food source, we can we can use those enzymes to make the minerals available to our plants. So it's just the way the world works. This is how soil is made. And how we can feed our plants with it is just, taking a little bit of time to understand how the world works, how ecology works. And so we talked about, previously, what is ecological gardening? And we're going to talk about that. And I think this, if you don't mind, I can just kind of segue into it.
Yeah, absolutely.
So ecological gardening to me is taking that step back and remembering that we are nature, that we are all a part of this beautiful system of life, that maybe we can pretend like we know and we're manipulating microbes to work for us, but in reality, 99% of our DNA is microbial DNA. We are more microbes than we are human. And so it's already happening around us. And being an ecological gardener is taking that step and understanding we're working with nature. We're working with an ecosystem. We are part of an ecosystem. So how can we make observations to see how it works and how to, I don't want to say manipulate, but work with, in harmony, sync with ecology. So for instance, I've talked about this compost tea. So the compost tea versus an extract, for instance, is where you take compost and you would put it in like a paint strainer and you put it in a 5-gallon bucket with some air stones and you bubble it. Now, let's bubble it for 4 hours. Look at it under a microscope. Let's bubble it for 12 hours. Look at it under a microscope. What's happening each time? Well, if you know a little bit about ecology, you would understand that every ecosystem has a population according to the resources that are available. And this is called a carrying capacity. So every species has a carrying capacity. And when you take a bunch of diversity of microbes from that compost and you put it into a tea, that first 4-hour mark, we look at it under a microscope, we're going to see a lot of diversity. Typically in these teas, we're giving it a food source, which is like a molasses or a sugar or some kind of carbohydrate for them to feed off of. And the further we get along, we're going to see less diversity, but more population count. So the stronger, the ones that thrive in that particular environment are going to explode, but only to a certain point, because every ecosystem has a carrying capacity. So if you get past a point where there's no more resources, then that population dwindles and it dies off. And so looking at your garden as a way of how can I provide the resources to attract the species that I want that are going to provide my plant with, let's say, integrated pest management. They're going to have, that's parasitic wasps, lacewings, ladybugs. Well, what are they attracted to? Do I have enough of those resources to support that ecosystem, that population in my ecosystem? Or am I focusing completely on growing my medicinal plant and wiping out all of the native species and not having this diversity? And so ecological gardening is taking a step back and kind of looking at your garden through the lens of an ecologist, because we all are ecologists, whether we like it or not. We're having an effect on the ecosystem that we live in. because we're nature and it's everywhere. So I'm super passionate about. I mean, before getting involved in industry, I worked for the Nature Conservancy and Endangered Species Management. And so this is my perspective on the world. And I think it's important to remember that the most important part of every garden is you. Like, you as the individual, you're the one, your outlook, the lens that you see life through is the way that you're going to garden. And so I can tell you how to garden and you can tell people how to garden, but the garden needs to be, it's a beautiful reflection of the person who is doing it, the gardener. You know, that saying, like, the best fertilizer is a gardener's shadow, right? And it's true, because being out there and doing what you love, because maybe you don't like composting, maybe you don't want to deal with this. So finding things like, okay, maybe a worm bin is more your style than a 3-foot pile of rotting, decaying matters, turning that around. And maybe, bugs aren't your thing, or whatever it is, or maybe they are. Like, focus in on the thing that you love the most and have your garden reflect that. But remember that we are all nature. We're all in an ecosystem. And so regardless of whether you think you're ecologically gardening, you are if you're doing it outside. I mean, I guess indoors you could be like, not necessarily I still think you are. But that's my long tangent rant on it.
That's super informative. Now, in regards to ecological gardening, one thing that comes to mind is kind of the native species. And I remember a couple months ago now, actually it was like 6+ months ago, I was at some random fair locally here. I live in the desert. They had a booth, and there was a gardening booth, and they were giving out free plants and stuff, tomato plants and stuff. But they also had information and seeds. And I actually got some free seeds. It was just native species. It was like wildflowers, I think I ended up getting. I haven't planted them yet. I just moved to a new house, actually. And I'm trying to get my outdoor garden going. But I eventually plan to plant some of those native species because they're for this climate, right? So, I think kind of keeping things in mind more about what is native to your environment, learning about those species, and then adding them into your system is kind of a step in the right direction. And I do want to go back to composting real quick, though. You mentioned you prefer composting. Now, there are several types of composting. We did get into composting in our last talk, but it's been several years, right? So things have changed. What type of composting are you doing these days? Thermophilic? Are you vermicomposting? Bokashi composting? Like, what are you doing? And what type of information can you kind of give us to get going on that avenue?
Definitely. So I think that this is a great opportunity to say where the gardener is the most important part of the puzzle. And that is the same for the composter. Because when we talked before, I don't even know if I'd had my son yet, or it was like just having him and I was still, bright-eyed and fresh-faced. And after 4 years of parenthood, my style of gardening and composting is definitely not as strict. Like, I was doing like a 3-bin method, keeping things separate, layering it according to like height, and just being like so nitpicky and OCD about my compost. And now I'm like, I got a compost corner in my garden. So I I weed, every a few days a week, and I fill up a 5-gallon bucket with weeds. I throw that in. It doesn't get measured. It's just a pile in the corner of the garden. I water it. I turn it once, every other week, probably, if I'm lucky. And so that's where you, the gardener, like, it's your perspective, it's your life, it's what's going on for you. So there's no one right way to do anything. I was doing a worm bin. I am not doing a worm bin now. That's just, again, parenthood has just changed everything. So composting is literally just a pile. Sometimes it gets hot, but it's not even getting that hot. And I'm really looking into Johnson Sioux bioreactor for my lazy composting. So it's like a combination of thermophilic and static. So like static is basically what I'm doing, except I'm doing a little bit more. Static is like you set it and forget it. It's like what people have been doing for tens of thousands of years. Like maybe dig a pit, throw all your waste in there and bury it. That's what we're, like... And so the Johnson-Su bioreactor is where you put like a pallet down, and then you use like hog wire or some kind of fencing that you wrap around itself, like a hog panel, so that it creates a circle. And then you put that circle of fencing on top of the pallet, and you insert, I think, 6 plastic tubes, like you would use maybe for like a French drain, and you drill holes in it, and you layer it with decaying leaves and wood chips, and you have it filled to the top, and you put like a sprinkler head on top or some kind of watering system so it automates, and you let it sit for a year. So thermophilic versus static. Static is where you're just letting it sit in a pile, not touching it. Thermophilic, you're adding oxygen, water, and it's creating heat from the bacteria. It reaches 170 degrees for 3 days. So the Johnson-Su, you're adding air with the pipes, and you're adding water with the irrigation, but you're not turning it. It's just the air moving from the bottom of the pallet through the sides and through the center of those pipes. And because you're not touching it, it actually it's a fungal dominant compost versus a bacterial dominant compost, where thermophilic is bacterial dominant. And by not touching anything, you're allowing the fungal spores, which using leaves and wood chips as the primary source, which is high in lignin, which is what fungus likes to feed on. And so you're allowing the fungal hyphae to grow throughout this whole pile. And so you're creating a compost that is incredibly rich in mycelium. And then you can take that and you can apply it all over. And this is really another ecological perspective, really great for your garden ecosystem, because most of us are in a bacterial dominant ecology, because we're focusing on that primary like ecosystem, which means that we're disturbing it all the time. We're breaking the ground, tilling, we're pulling new plants in and out. We're doing all these things to disturb the soil ecosystem. So the first thing that comes in any ecosystem after a disturbance is bacteria. And you can see this if you just take a pause in nature and look at like places where there's a wildfire or a road grade or fencing, somewhere where there's some kind of disturbance. You're going to see legumes. You're going to see hairy vetch. You're going to see lupins. These have associated relationship with bacteria. Now, why would they do this? Because there's a disturbance. They need to provide life for other plants to come in. And so they're pulling nitrogen out of the atmosphere, putting it into the soil, creating a habitable space. Now, the further you get along in an ecosystem, it's called a succession. You'll get to that primary is the beginning, secondary, and then an established ecosystem. We're going to see it move towards fungal dominant. The more stable the ecosystem is, the more time that it's had, you're going to see more trees, you're going to see more fungus, you're going to just see things have balanced out. Fungus can spread like so far, but it's very slow moving and it does not like disturbances. So having the understanding of how species interact with one another, and then like being able to apply that to your garden, and then like create a compost specifically for that. I love it. I love it. So I'm really excited to get this Johnson-Su bioreactor built. It sounds way more like high tech than it is, but I mean, it's beautiful. It's going to bring in that fungal dominance, and that's something that's really important to me. Now, it should be important to everyone, because phosphorus is such a limiting factor because of its limited quantity. Researchers today are saying that there's 60 years of phosphorus for our crops, like 60 harvests left in our soils with the amount of phosphorus, how we're using it, the ways that, we're applying it. And it is mobile in water when we apply it as a salt based. So it washes down into the Gulf of Mexico, causes eutrophication. We have all of these issues with phosphorus, and it's a limiting factor. So how do we notice, how does phosphorus become available in nature? Well, mycorrhizal fungi releases phosphorus. Mycorrhizal fungi creates acids and enzymes that open up and make phosphorus that's otherwise insoluble or locked in really tight in soil particles, and allows it to be used by plants. So does barley with phosphatases. So that's something that I am really focusing on in my garden, is how can I limit my phosphorus use, but open it up what I have, maximize the potential of what phosphorus is in my garden, because phosphorus is one of those, especially as an organic gardener, if that's important to you, not using salt-based things. Well, and that's a misnomer. Salts are just a negative and a positive put together, but most people just call synthetic salt. So that's my mistake. I would like to not say that. A synthetic, because salts are fine. It's just a negative and a positive, an anion and a cation. But bat guano, seabird guano, those are, in my opinion, detrimental to ecosystems, the way that we harvest them. You're destroying islands that are nesting grounds to get the seabird guano. You're destroying caves, which are such sensitive ecosystems. I mean, a cave, how many caves are there in the world? And what kind of interesting life forms are in a cave? And here we are we need the bat guano, so we're going to just scrape it clean and get all of these droppings out, destroying this sensitive ecosystem. So then we have rock phosphate, which is mined, and that has its own set of problems. I typically use rock phosphate or a bone meal because that's a byproduct. Again, it's probably also CAFOs. I mean, you can just go on and on of all of the problems, and you have to focus on what's important to you and what you can control. But I know that I can control accessing the phosphorus that's naturally available in my native soil by promoting a fungal dominance, by promoting, the barley and the enzymes and acids that are going to unlock the phosphorus that's already there. And that's a great way of, another closing the loop of your farm is using your native soil, but using perhaps the Johnson 2 bioreactor, or just establishing a mycorrhizal network that promotes, the availability of phosphorus.
So much good information there. I mean, that the stat about phosphorus being gone in 60 years is just mind-blowing on its own. I mean, it's kind of scary to think of the outlook, and I'm glad you gave that information and some things that we can do there. I do vermicomposting. I have a small worm bin, and then also doing I just got a compost pile in my backyard, static composting. I was just dumping on things on there, and then just I'll revisit it later, and see how things have broken down. But I have not done thermophilic yet. I have bokashi composting, which I'm just starting up now. So I'm excited to do some of this stuff and actually get my outside going. Like I mentioned, I live in the desert. I did a soil test on there. I had Bryant Mason come onto the podcast, and he did a soil test. And he went over it.
Oh, awesome!
1% organic matter. So it's super low. Rock, sand. I've got some work to do out there if I want to actually plant in ground, which would be kind of cool. I mean, it's just a long process, and I'm just in the beginning stages of all that. But composting is definitely a key component of reviving my backyard. So I've been doing a lot of that, and I'm going to continue to do a lot of that in the future.
Awesome. If you can, try to get wood chips as much as you can.
Yeah.
There's a website called chipdrop.com, and you can sign up, and they will bring you have to accept it though. It's 30 yards. So a giant dump truck full of wood chips. I've signed up, but I live so rural that people in my area have said oh, I got mine in 3 weeks, the people who live in town. And then the people who live rural, oh, I've been on it for 3 years, and they've never brought. So I'm currently on the search. But most of us, we have sand, silt, or clay, right, as our predominant. Those are the 3 soil types. And so you being in the desert, you're going to have a lot of sand, which means it's the biggest soil particle, right, the largest. Where clay and the smallest, it's so small that it has an electrical charge, and it actually attracts things to it like water, hydrogen, that positive molecule. And that's why you see compaction and pooling in clay because the water, it has a hard time moving through the pore space. It attracts to the actual particle itself. And then your sand is going to be so big and it's just going to drain out, and 1% organic matter. So it's like as much as you can. I mean, composting, it's good. You're going to have to bring in a lot more compost than just your home produced and your worms. But if you can get the wood chips, that's an amazing way to start and just lay it down and have a huge, thick, layer. And then it's also going to kill weeds. So that's a great start to adding organic matter. And which we haven't talked about. I briefly talked about the chickens, but animals, if you can. Animals are like an integral part of all closed loop regenerative systems. And you can be a vegetarian. You don't have to eat them. I mean, I was a vegetarian for years. I'm no longer, but like animals of whatever animal fits into your life. So maybe it's only worms because that's your lifestyle, but a few chickens. I mean, sounds like you have more space than the last time I talked to you. So chickens are definitely a huge, like an introductory animal for anyone. They're so easy to take care of. They lay eggs like clockwork. They're cute and funny, and they don't need a ton of space. You can get like, maybe a 10 foot by 10 foot, and you would have, I don't know, probably at least 5 chickens in that amount of space. I have a 10 by 20 foot run, and I have 13 chickens in there, and they're fine. And then you're getting pest control because they love eating insects. You're getting eggs that you can eat. You can make water-soluble calcium with shells. You just collect them, bake them in the oven, dissolve them in vinegar, and then you can apply that as a foliar, or you can apply it as a root drench in a tea. There's one of your feeding your plant right there with a closed loop, system. And then they're going to help you compost. You can throw scraps to them. Then you take their bedding, and their bedding is really high in organic matter. It's going to have the carbohydrates from either straw, or I've been using hemp hurd bedding for my chickens. So basically they take the stalks of the hemp plants and chip it up into a fine material. And so I was really nerding out on like, what's the best bedding for my chickens? Because there's pine shavings, of course, and then there's the hemp hurd, and then there's straw. And I was like going through the pros and cons. Well, like some produce more dust than others, and hemp hurd is supposedly like the superior bedding for chickens. So I've been using that, and that in itself, you could, what do we use with our medicinal plant stalks? You could save all of those stalks and you could chip them, and then you could create your own bedding, and then they poop in it, and then you take that out and you compost it, and then you throw it right back into the garden, and there you go. There you got another loop closed right there. So I think chickens are next on your list.
That's awesome. Yeah, I was going to ask you about incorporating animals into your garden in order to make it closed loop. So I'm glad you got into the chickens. I know I had somebody on the podcast before that had rabbits, and he was indoors, but he used rabbits, and he had it, I think he had it go down into his basement, and they were pooping into his living soil beds. And so that was pretty interesting to hear that he was using his rabbits.
That's pretty cool. I was going to just say, that's amazing to be able to, so they were pooping, did he have it set up so it was automated?
Yeah, I guess it had access to upstairs as well as downstairs. And I think his living soil beds were downstairs. And it was just above the living soil beds. I don't know if he did a rotation. I can't really remember how his setup actually was, but
interesting.
He was using his rabbits in order to get that fertilizer.
I do want to make the distinction between rabbits and chickens because, not all poop is created equal. And so this is a good rule of thumb that any pelletized poo doesn't necessarily need to be composted. So if it comes out in a little pellet, like a rabbit or a goat or an alpaca, that's cool enough. It doesn't have as much nitrogen in it. So you can use it as a top dressing. Whereas chickens poop and pee at the same time. So it's really high in nitrogen. I think 5% or something nitrogen. So you need to compost it or it'll burn your plants. You can't just let it go straight on there. So if you are going to start incorporating animals into your garden, whether it's, worms would be the beginner. Worms, poo you can use, they can be in there. Chickens are also a great beginner. Rabbits don't take up too much space. I'm moving on probably. I've had goats in the past and I'm torn because I'm on 12 acres now and I have about 3 acres of pasture that's like fenced in for cattle. And we had cows this year that grazed, like our neighbors brought them in. And I really was like, maybe I should get a milk cow because milk is a great excess nutrient. You can feed your plants with it. You can feed other animals. Pigs love milk. Chickens love milk. You can grow like giant pumpkins with milk for some reason. They just go crazy. I wonder if it's the calcium. And so I was like, oh, maybe that, but maybe the goat instead, because you can do a milking goat. And then it has the pelletized poo because the cow poop is going to be, you'd have to go out and I've already thought this because my field is covered in cow poop. And I'm like, really, am I going to go out there and pick up all these cow patties and push my, no, I don't think so. So if you're thinking about animals and incorporating them, so really think it through because it's another life form, right? How it's going to fit into your lifestyle, and then also about the poop and how you can actually use it. Alpacas are great because they poop in the same spot. They just go back. And so you just get a giant pile and you don't have to walk around and pick up the poop. They'll just go, they create a little bathroom area and they'll just keep pooping there. And that, if you have the space, I've really been thinking about alpacas just for that. But I can't justify necessarily just having an animal for poop, at least with the chickens, I have eggs that I can eat and the shells. And if I wanted to kill them, I guess I could eat them. The same with the goats for the milk, but an alpaca is just I guess I could learn how to make yarn or something from the fur. I'm not really sure. So that's and think about it. If you're going to incorporate animals for this closed loop system, is how are you really how is it going to fit into your life? What byproducts are they going to create? And then how are you going to feed them? And how are you going to handle the poop? Because not all poop is created equal.
Really good advice about not all poop being created equal. I had no idea that the rabbit poop was going to be more readily usable versus chicken manure. I would love to have chickens eventually. I know there are some people down the street from where I live that have chickens, and I worry because it gets so hot here. It's 100 degrees every day, June, July, August. I don't really know too much about how well they do in heat. I'm sure they'd obviously be in a coop and there'd be shade and stuff like that. And then wintertime, not really sure. So I'd have to do more research in order to figure all that out. But it's something that I would definitely consider adding in the future.
Guinea hens are also an option then for you. I mean, chickens can handle really severe temperatures, but guinea hens are from Africa and they're wild and they don't even need a coop as long as you have something for them to fly up into at night. Just an idea.
That's cool. I want to flip it up now, move on from that, and let's get into IPM. I think this is an area where a lot of folks that are going the organic or all natural route, they kind of struggle because there are so many products that you can buy on there, some being safe, some really not being safe, but there are all natural ways to go about IPM, right? Talk to us about how you go about IPM.
Yeah, definitely. So I think it's really great that you said, some are safe and some are not safe, even if they're organic, even if they say they're organic. I did some consulting when I was in California as a licensed cultivator, and really your product is being tested for dispensaries and they're doing really stringent testing. And so I had one of my clients who was using a product called Pyganic, and it is pyrethrum based. It's organic. But pyrethrums are made from chrysanthemum flowers. And so it's natural, but it takes 64 days for it to leave the tissue of the plant. And so that's if you spray once in early flower, it's going to show up in your testing and then you're going to fail. Or you may not fail for flower, but then you make concentrate and then it shows up in your concentrate. And this is like a big problem because we think that like just because it's organic and it's sold in the store that and it says it's safe that we can use it. Same thing with like neem oil. You know, there's anecdotal evidence. People suggest that, you know, hyperemesis could be correlated with neem oil. We don't know definitively if that's true or not, but it's like, why spray our flowers with anything, even if it says it's natural, that could cause issues for our health? This is our medicine, right? I mean, and same thing with our food. Food is medicine more than anything else in the world. Like, you eat 3 meals a day, what you put into your body is going to determine your health. Like, that is the hands down, like, the biggest indicator of our health. So for me to approach IPM in an integrated and holistic way, first of all, I'm creating the healthiest plant that I can, because having natural immunity is right there in itself going to help prevent pests. So that means boosting it through things like aloe and salicylic acid, spraying that, or silicon, you know, and having the strong cell wall so that piercing, biting insects can't, you know, it's harder for them. Not giving too much nitrogen. I see this all the time, people posting these photos and the leaves are really, really, really dark green and kind of curling a little bit, and it looks slightly like, if you can see any kind of nitrogen toxicity, any kind, you're over. And that's a signal to all of the piercing, biting insects. Aphids love it. Like, the soft-bodied insects know when there's high nitrogen and will go to that plant specifically. So having your plants in a nice, as healthy balance as possible is like the first thing that I would do. And then companion planting. I plant sweet alyssum, I plant buckwheat, I plant daikon, always those 3 around my garden. And I do sunflowers. So let's go back to the sweet alyssum attracts green lacewings. Green lacewings eat like everything. You want to attract beneficial insects that are like omnivores that just go crazy and will eat the aphids and the spider mites, and that'll just take on everything. Parasitic wasps, they'll do the same with the aphids and caterpillars. They come to the buckwheat. Ladybugs come to the buckwheat. And trying to stagger, like, I really love buckwheat because it just keeps flowering. Same with the sweet alyssum. It's not just like a one and done kind of a thing. Sunflowers attract birds, which are going to, consume. Right now, my garden, well, not right now, but earlier in the season, my biggest issues were grasshoppers. So it wasn't like too horrible, right? They just eat the leaves. But because I live in the Palouse, if you're familiar with that area, it's basically the bread basket. Like, we produce almost most of the wheat for the US in Washington. It's a wheat growing area. So everyone around me is growing like wheat and timothy and alfalfa. It's like grass, hay, wheat. So we have all these grasshoppers, and they came down and they're nibbling, and I didn't think anything of it. I have my chickens free ranging. They're eating the grasshoppers. I've got sunflowers attracting birds to help eat them. But I saw on one plant this amazing variegation. So it's like white, pink, splotchy, variegated coloring on the leaves, and eventually when it was flowering, it did it into the flower as well. And it was only on this one plant in this specific area, and it started, I noticed, curling the leaf tips as well. And so I looked online, I looked on Instagram, I looked on Google Scholar, people's pictures, just to see if I could find anything that resembled this odd growth. And the closest I could come to find, and I was looking specifically at viruses and viroids because they attack the chloroplasts, which are responsible for producing chlorophyll. So a lot of the times when we have variegation in a sick plant, it could be the result of a virus or viroid because of that. So that was my inference. I was like, going to look for that first. And I found beet curly top virus. And it's transmitted through grasshoppers and freaking leafhoppers, which I'm surrounded by, and then all these conventional fields. So I was like, okay, this is my, my hypothesis for this pathogen or what's going on. And then I saw it start slowly moving further around different parts of the plant, and then also into localized spots on other plants that were just around that. So the grasshopper feeds on one leaf that's infected with the viroid, goes to the other plant, feeds on it, and it spreads. So this is like a little side tangent, but it was just, that's an opportunity to observe nature, to see what's going on. So what I'm already doing, right, is trying to boost my plant's immune system naturally. So I'm working on this product right now. It's something that I use in my garden every week. Immunity, that's what I call it. And it's how can we boost our plant's natural immune system? And it came as a result because I had a garden that was infected with hot latent viroid about 4 years ago. And what's associated with that is dudding. But if you can boost your plant's immune system as much as possible, it's not going to be at what it would be if it was 100% healthy. But in a living soil system where you can't just get rid of all of your soil, especially when you're planting in the ground, the virus or viroid can live within the mycelium of your living soil. It can just stay there, so you can keep seeing it. So what do you want to do? You want to boost your plant's natural immune system with things like salicylic acid, jasmonic acid. These two plant hormones are the hormones that communicate with the plant about what's going on in the outside world to the inside. So jasmonic acid and salicylic acid are either abiotic or biotic factors. So that's living or non-living. So the stress of either heat, drought, cold, whatever, that kind of stress, overwatering, underwatering, or we have biting, piercing insects. So that's jasmonic acid, where salicylic acid is like that heat, that environmental. But they communicate with each other, and they communicate with all of the other plant hormones inside of the plant. And so how do we take our plant and increase the levels of jasmonic acid and salicylic acid within our plant to stimulate that communication so that they have a better immune system first and foremost? So things like insect frass, which are going to boost the natural jasmonic acid. Things, same with a mycorrhizal fungi, actually increases jasmonic acid. Aloe, and contains salicylic acid and increases your plant's salicylic acid levels within it. And so I did, this is years of me reading white papers and going through different various instances in my garden. So I'm working on this product that's just natural things to boost your plant's natural immunity. So I'll give you some when I see you at MJ BizCon in December, and you'll have to let me know what you think. But that would be the beginning of your plant's health and IPM, is just doing everything you possibly can to boost its natural immunity, and then create an environment that has the defenders, the microorganisms that are thriving, because that's right. You think of your immune system, you have the right microbes in place. So you want to have a healthy microbiome in your soil. You want to have a diversity of companion plants to attract beneficial insects. And then you can use specific microbes to combat specific pests. And that's probably my favorite thing. Is just knowing how amazing these little microbes are at doing specific things. So, for instance, like Bavaria bassiana is a really popular one. I really like Isaria fumosa rosea. The issue with these biocontrols, so those two are types of fungal spores that you can inoculate, spray on your plant, and they're going to sporulate and infect pests, and then the pest will die. Now, the issue we have with that is that they need to be applied in a specific way. It's typically at a 80% relative humidity, between 70 and 80 degrees, so that it's the right parameter for that fungus to grow. And so a lot of people won't have success with it because, they're just putting it in a 62-degree water or whatever, and then just spraying it and be like, oh, what's going on? So you need to have that knowledge. That's that ecological gardening, to understand how species interact with one another, what kind of environment do they need to thrive in, and then understand the mode of action. So like the Isaria fumosa rosea, which is a strain that's in like Ancora PFR 97, no fly. It's very particular of the environment that it needs to grow, and it needs at least 2 weeks. So if you have an aphid infestation, which aphids are born with 4 to 12 live young without having sex, they're asexual reproducers. So that's 2 weeks, 14 times 4 to 12 per day. Your infestation is out of control at that point, right? You can't wait around for a zombie fungus spore to kill and all. It's just not going to work. So then you think about like, okay, I've got my beneficials around. That's one layer of integrated pest management. I can use a biocontrol, but I really want to knock it back. So that's when you would use perhaps chemical, right? The 3 pillars of IPM are cultural, biological, and chemical. Cultural being your practice as the gardener. So that's, not coming into your garden with dirty clothes from visiting your friend's garden, or using dirty tools, or, how you're observing your garden. Are you deleafing? Are you looking for insects? Are you doing these things? This is your first layer of defense. How are you raising your garden? Is it healthy? Are you overfeeding nitrogen? That's all that cultural. And then the biological is the companion planting, the beneficial insects, the microbes that you're inoculating with either underground or applying it as a foliar. And then chemical is like a last resort, right? But sometimes we need to use it. And so like for vegetative phase, I go for Neem. Neem is something that has been used for thousands of years in Ayurvedic medicine. It's safe to consume. Men would take it in India because it slows your sperm down. So it's a natural male birth control. And it does the same thing for insects. It slows down the reproduction of insects. It slows down their molting process. It slows down everything, the life cycle. So I use a neem meal in my soil as an amendment. It is a fertilizer as well. And then I use a neem oil in the vegetative phase if I need to, if there is infestation. I saw one aphid in veg this summer, and I've had in the past, I lived in like areas where everyone had a 75-foot greenhouse and everyone had aphids and spider mites. And so I see one aphid, I'm like, no, you are not getting into this garden. And I luckily, I'm out in the middle of nowhere, no other growers around me, just wheat fields. And I sprayed with the neem, and then I sprayed with the Isaria famosa rosea. And the neem, what it does is like you're stacking things to make sure and doing it in the right order, right? Because the neem is going to slow down the reproduction of the pest, and you can hit it a couple times. And then you want to bring in the biological control, like the fungal spores that are going to have time to do their thing. It's just like layering and using things in a purposeful way and understanding how they attack. And I actually just started using a new product, which I'm not a product person. Like I try to, we have to have products, right? We can't make everything homemade. But Organishield, have you heard of it or used it?
I have, yeah.
So it's synthetically produced, but it's based off of sucrose octanate, which is a sugar ester that is found in a tobacco plant. And they weren't able to extract enough of that, so they synthesized that molecule in a lab. And it is supposedly safer. The guy I interviewed him, and he's like, oh yeah, he uses it on his kitchen to clean things, and you could drink it. And like, I don't know about that, but I used that once after in flower, like in the beginning of flower, because I'm not going to use neem. First of all, we don't know if neem is safe if it's combusted. There's anecdotal evidence about the hyperemesis, and then also has a really strong smell. Like it's like Indian food. You know what I mean? Like you don't want to be spraying that on your buds. So that is the last, that chemical. And I did 3 sprays, 4 actually. So neem in veg, and then the fungal, and then later on, I did spray once with the Organishield just to see with the grasshoppers, because he said supposedly that they would kill grasshoppers, and I did see dead grasshoppers. So I was like, okay, I guess this works. Didn't have a lot of issues. And then I did spray once more for caterpillars with Bacillus thuringiensis, and it's roughly September's for caterpillars outdoors. And so I had some moths. If you see moths, then you're probably going to have caterpillars. So I did spray for that. And Bacillus is a soil-dwelling bacterium that only targets the family Lepidoptera, which is a caterpillar, so it's pest-specific. It will only kill caterpillars. But, for instance, if I was in other flower-safe things that I would do would be like other types of Bacillus. There's a whole variety of Bacillus bacteria, and they can outcompete things like botrytis and powdery mildew. Same thing with trichoderma. So I like to do like a 5 strains of different trichoderma. Trichoderma is a fungus that's super aggressive. And so just by spraying your plant with it, you can outcompete for other pathogens in the fall, like, again, botrytis or powdery mildew. And it's ubiquitous. Like, these microbes are everywhere. They're gonna be on your plant, but maybe not in that high of concentration. And so it's just safe to spray your plant lightly with the Trichoderma Bacillus blend. And then you're not gonna have to worry about so much like the bud rot and the PM that we know can have detrimental effect if you consume moldy plants. Like that's terrible for your health. So those are things that I would do for a flower safe IPM.
So much good information. Every episode that we've filmed together, it's just been jam packed with information that's just so useful. And you definitely have this advanced knowledge that you're able to explain in a beginner friendly manner. And I think that's one reason why so many people like you, is because you're able to kind of help the folks that are just starting out, or maybe they're in intermediate stages, or maybe advanced folks as well. But you have so much good information. This hour flew by. We've been sitting here for an hour. There's so much more to say about closed loop gardening, but maybe we can get you back for another episode to continue on the conversation. We're going to wrap things up here. Can you tell listeners how they could find you and what you have upcoming in the future?
Yeah, definitely. So queenofthesungrown.com, you'll find all of the things there. The Instagram, the YouTube. I have a Patreon where I put my writing. I do weekly classes every Tuesday at 4:20. You can come and hang out, and we talk about whatever you want. Obviously, I can nerd out for an hour easily on different topics. So, sign up for my newsletter on my website. I do publish things once a month with tips and tricks about things in the garden. And, just check it out. Come say hi. I love answering gardening questions. You can literally send me a DM or join my Discord, and I will try to help you to the best of my ability. And I think that everyone should grow more plants. Literally, let's connect the flora, fauna, and fungi in our homes and our gardens, and not just grow the one medicinal plant that is so popular to talk about, but grow as much as you possibly can, you guys. My goal this next year is to grow 50% of my family's food. And so I bought a cow that's in the freezer now. I've got the chickens. I planned out my entire 2025 garden with the amount of plants to produce the amount of pounds that would feed a family of 3 for an entire year. So you can follow along on YouTube. And if you have questions about that, I may teach a class on it because it's so important. Food is, like I said, food is medicine. So connect with me in any way that you would like to. I love talking about this.
Awesome. So much exciting stuff upcoming in the future. I'll definitely be following along, that's for sure. I'll definitely have a link to Alexandria's channel down in the YouTube description section below, so you can easily get to her and give her a follow. Anything regenerative gardening, all natural, organic, permaculture, all that stuff, closed loop gardening, follow her for all that information. Really, really good stuff here today. Thank you so much. Got to give a thank you to the Patreon folks as well. Patreon.com/MrGrowIt. 100% of what is donated through Patreon goes right back into the podcast. the folks that are being scrolled on the screen right now in the producer tier. Special thanks to you. And yeah, thank you so much for coming on, and hope you enjoy the rest of your day.
Awesome. Thank you.
Peace out, everyone. Catch you in the next episode.